The workshop on interviewing skills, including structured interviewing, includes the following content. The participants begin in an area where we cover what I call clarifying job requirements. So in order to conduct an effective interview, the interviewer needs to know there might be a stale job description, may or may not be up to date. Actually quite important that it be up to date, that the job specifications, job requirements are clear to the interviewer. So it's kind of a foundational piece of any training in effective interviewing, is that the interviewer understands what he or she needs to know about the job requirements. I also then cover and work with the participants on the concept of the mutuality of the job interview process. That not only is the company, the organization, sizing up this applicant, this candidate, she is also sizing you and the organization up. Many interviewers forget that concept, so I talk about it, and I also have discussion with the participants and their experiences, and ask them to share with one another their experiences and the importance of having that mutual sense of both the candidate and the organization assessing one another through the interview process. There's a section on legal considerations for interviewing. Of course, for every interviewer to not bring risk to the company, and to be aware of what the types of questions are that can be asked in types of questions. There's a little Q&A on that. There's a little exercise of matching, identifying two columns of questions that are acceptable, questions that are not acceptable. There are some in gray areas too, and we have conversation about that. Better to be cautious when it comes to the gray areas. So that's a part of this workshop as well. General interview skills are important in general. Some participants have less experience conducting interviews. Some have more, so we make sure that all the participants understand some of the basic general interview skills. And it's in that part of the workshop where we begin to do some role playing as well, asking all the participants to pair up into twos, do some interviewing of one another, give each other feedback, and then a couple of them do, before the entire group, conduct interviews of each other, and we give them some challenges, and then I give them feedback, and the group gives them feedback on how to improve their general interviewing skills. That's followed by a section that's related to that, that's called probing. This is a deficiency for many interviewers, where they fail to follow up, they fail to do follow-up questions. When an interviewee gives a vague answer, gives an answer that might have been intentionally evasive, or might have just been the person couldn't think of such a good answer. So that's the probing follow-up. There are specific skills and practices that are actually easy to do in a group setting like this. Again, having some role playing, having the participants critique one another, and having the facilitator, myself, critique and give feedback to the participants on ways that they can probe and follow up to get the desired information and understanding of the individual. That's part of the interview process. Then cover behavioral interviewing. Behavioral interviewing has been around for a long time, but it's still quite a valuable technique. So I cover that. I give the participants practice on becoming skilled. Not a difficult skill to learn, but does require some practice. Examples are given, tools are provided to become an interviewer who's skilled at conducting at least as part of any interview, including some behavioral questions. That is followed by the section on structured interviewing. And in structured interviewing, especially in an organization like ours that we're discussing, where there's considerable volume of candidates who are considered and hired for same positions, structured interviews are quite valuable, because it gives the opportunity to introduce a scientific element into the interview. We know it's not by any means an exact science, interviewing and selecting people, but on the other hand, many individual managers and organizations go to the other extreme, and they do in very haphazard, leave it to the manager to conduct the interview in a kind of a free-form way, the way he or she feels like they should be interviewing. That makes it a process that's already not nearly 100% scientific. That makes it almost 100% unscientific. When you introduce structured questions where all the interviewers across all the stores are asking the same, at least the same, let's say 5 questions, that gives much more opportunity to compare applicants and to know that all of our applicants are at least being asked these same 5 questions, and allows for some degree more of predictability, which is what we want. We want to minimize the mistakes, want to minimize the bad hires. That any organization can make bad hires, but especially when we're hiring store managers, we don't want to make mistakes. Or if we do, we want to have them minimized. And one way we can do that is by introducing this concept of structured interviewing, not leaving it up to everybody's just how they feel that day, or just shooting the breeze with candidates. There ought to be structured discipline, and that's what this component includes. Again, practice, feedback to the participants on how to conduct structured interviews. The final segment that I include is evaluating emotional intelligence. This may or may not fit for the organization. Some organizations have particular competencies that are particular to that organization that I will insert into the training, the interview skills training. One that I think has a lot of applicability to a lot of organizations is this one of evaluating emotional intelligence. But if a particular organization like yours has a certain quality, a competency that you think is more important to focus on, we can customize it even more by this portion is where there's a good opportunity for that type of customization. I then conclude by talking about interview biases. It's important for interviewers to be aware that we do all have biases. There's no question. If you think you don't, you're wrong. And I list them, and of the list of 10, 12, 16 different biases that researchers have found in interviews, any particular interviewer might be subject to 3, 4, 5, or however many of those biases. The best way to avoid letting those biases lead to a poor decision is by being aware of them. So that is covered in the workshop as part of the discussion, and to make sure that the participants have more awareness when it comes to those. So that's the basic content. And again, the customization part is something I'd like to discuss with you and ask you for your organization, how do you see what areas might be of particular importance to highlight or even to add to this workshop?